Richard Korman from ENR.com. We're here today with Jeff Levy. He's the CEO of Railworks, the specialty contractor that does track and transit services. Jeff, you've had such a long and accomplished career in construction. Tick off some of the names of the companies that you've worked for.
Well, Richard, since we know one another, I've worked for Stone & Webster.
Stone & Webster, right?
Briefly for Laird McGovern, now Bovis.
Laird McGovern Bovis, right?
JWP, now of course EMCOR.
Right.
And most recently Railworks Corporation.
Railworks. And even though times are good and Railworks is doing great, we know in this industry trouble is always around the next corner. Let's go inside and talk about that.
Sure.
Okay.
Be happy to. Because I had spent 6 or 8 months researching JWP. Most that was written. There was quite a bit of publicity about the company and its rise to fame and fortune, its growth. It was one of the top companies in America. It was in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It was really quite an accomplishment. So I was joining what I considered to be a $4 billion powerhouse that had staked out a position in mechanical and electrical construction.
Did it turn out that way?
Well, about 2 months after I was there, things started to crumble a bit, and results started to not look so good. Much of it was focused on the businesses that had been acquired that were not part of the construction business, the computer business, mostly computer sales, reselling, and leasing, and as well as some of the newer businesses that JWP was entering in the environmental area. But it wasn't long before it was a mad scramble, and this $4 billion powerhouse was struggling to pay bills, cash crunch, and ultimately it led to JWP's reorganization. Well, you know, it was difficult because most of the people that worked with me and for me had been companies that were acquired and were not involved with anything but the construction business. And they couldn't understand why. Everything they were told when the deal was coming together and everything they had experienced suddenly fell apart. There was a lot of frustration, a lot of angst. Many of the contractors we worked for were very concerned about their exposures, the ability to get work done. Our suppliers were concerned.
How hard did it make your life at the time?
It was incredible because there was nothing that worked and there was nothing that was normal. Every day was a different situation. But at the end of the day, the fact that our companies were performing the work, knew their customers, and really were delivering on their contracts, it quieted down, and we more than struggled through. We actually performed pretty well through the process. But the initial disillusionment was overwhelming. We were participating as EMCOR in a number of the same investor conferences that Encompass did. And Encompass, as you probably know, was a composite of Group Mac and Building 1, two consolidations themselves. Yes. And we would attend conferences. Frank McGinnis would present on EMCOR's business plan. And we were generally abused and criticized by having very modest goals and not seeing the great vision of Encompass and at the time integrated electrical comfort systems. Yes. Great visions, huge projections of earnings growth, and we were always criticized for just not having the vision. In reality, I think the market has shown that we were focused very much on the reality of the businesses we were in. We projected an opportunity that was growth, really taking advantage of the network of companies that had been put together, and time has proved that we were more than correct. While at the same time, many of the people that were presenting these grand visions have fallen by the wayside, and Encompass is probably the best example. It's a bit of a stretch for me to talk about all of the issues that affected Stone & Webster, but I will tell you that when the company's core position in the nuclear power business was basically coming down simply because of the cessation of the market, it was very tough for them to find another act. And the company had been a powerhouse. It was as fine a place to start my career as you could imagine. I would do it all over again. But the point is, the leadership simply didn't read the sign correctly, from my view. Were reluctant to take moves that would leverage their strengths. In fact, at one point, Stone & Webster began to focus on construction opportunities to diversify. And instead of building power plants, the focus was on infrastructure and civil work, which had really been never much part of the company's portfolio. Well, I guess the thing that I saw is in successful companies, and the companies that were profiled in the study were all hugely successful for many years, sometimes over 100 years, with a legacy of projects and leadership and accomplishments. In some cases, I think it's tough to make a transition And Hugh Rice in his study talks about change and the pace of change.
Yes.
Sometimes if you wait too long and you need to hurry up change, it puts a stress on an organization. And it asks people to do things they probably were never well suited to do. The other thing I find, and perhaps more interesting, which is probably an issue for all contracting, it's a tough business. When we're successful, you feel tremendous. You feel an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. When you build a job, you're successful, it's a commercial success, and you almost can see that leading to a sense of invincibility. Where companies, large and very smart and capable companies, start convincing themselves they can do things that they probably can't. The risk for bad decisions is pretty high in the business. In some businesses, one can temper those risks a bit more. But it's the natural tendency of people that are successful in engineering and construction to believe they can accomplish great things. Sometimes it's a bridge too far.
You're accomplishing things at RailWorks. How do you prevent that same problem, that same feeling of invincibility from creeping into your corporate culture?
It's going back to the study again. It's the discipline. The thing I've constantly reminded financial markets, our investors over the years is we start with a new slate, very much like a high school coach. We can have the world's best athletes, and every 4 years they graduate. We can start with the world's best and most successful projects. But when we're finished, we have to start over. And it's difficult to know whether the next slate of projects are going to have the same opportunities as the ones you just finished. So it's keeping your head down and focusing on the job at hand. Absolutely, and I think that most companies that I'm familiar with, mine included, are using metrics during the bidding process to evaluate exposures, much more attention to commercial details in the contracts themselves.
Yes.
So we're becoming a more sophisticated business when I think the original legacy of our industry was being great builders. We were excellent at delivery of the trades and the work itself, and I think the pressures of the business that have been pushed down to our industry just in the last 20, 30 years have really forced us to become much more sophisticated from the business management standpoint.